Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode on Fit as a Fiddle. Our lovely guest today is Stephanie Heintzeler. She is a German-educated midwife and acupuncturist, but she's also a U.S.-educated doula and IBCLC, or International Board Certified Lactation Consultant. So clearly, Stephanie comes with a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the birth space, both from her former midwifery approach, and then all the work that she does in the New York City area and beyond, delivering babies like one-on-one in all different kinds of settings, all different types of births, and just bringing in that extra knowledge from, her background and working with New York City families also from various different backgrounds, just helping people find the birth that works for them and helping them feel more comfortable and easy during that whole process, which can often be very daunting and tense for many. So I'm excited to talk all things birth here with Stephanie today. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited that we were finally able to make this work. We've been bumping and crossing paths for many years now. And I've heard, obviously, I want you to talk about New York Baby, and I've heard so many people have such great things to say about the work that you do. So I'm really happy to be able to share that with our listeners and a wider audience today so they can get to know you more and what you do.
Yeah, sounds good.
So I'll let you just dive in first and tell us about, kind of what brought you into the space and all the different pockets of things that you do throughout the week and throughout the day.
I think the most fun right now and these days is that people know what a doula is doing. Because 5 or 10 years ago, when I said I'm a doula, they were like, what doula? What are you doing? They just had no idea. And now they know what it is. Sometimes they ask, what is the difference between a doula and a midwife, which we'll talk about. But it's just really good that this profession is so much more acknowledged now. And there's more programs in the city, because doulas are really the one person who connect all the dots from pregnancy to birth to postpartum. That's like the biggest thing, that everything with women, birthing people, whoever is pregnant, families, when they feel like, I don't know who I should ask this. It's not the OB. It's just nothing really physical that's going on. They don't know who to ask. And that's where the doula comes into the picture. And I got into the field very, very early on, since I've been 12 years old, actually. Because my little brother was born when I was 12. And I just thought this was all very exciting. And I kind of accompanied my mom's pregnancy, and I read up books, and I just loved this whole field and the changes in my mother's body. And 5 years later, actually, when I was 17, I was allowed to do an internship in a labor and delivery room in Germany, next to Frankfurt, where I grew up. And I was kind of hooked since then. I literally did a few internships and sometimes worked during the summer holidays at labor and delivery rooms to kind of earn some extra money. So it was pretty much a given thing that once I finished all my exams in school when I was 21, I think, I went into midwifery school right away and loved it. And yeah, haven't regretted it ever since. But from there, it's interesting to see that there's so many fields we can involve into. We can move into other approaches of healing and helping with pregnancy issues, like acupuncture, which I cannot use my license here, but we can use the points during labor and birth to help with pain relief. Then, of course, knowing about all these little bits of changes and behavioral issues sometimes that happen during pregnancy, where women don't know if that's normal or not, and then figuring out what kind of birth they want, because birth is huge. And if the birth ends up in a weird way where people leave the hospital or the birthing center or wherever they gave birth, and they come home and they wonder what happened, that's what doulas want to avoid, right? We do lower the C-section rate by 45%, which is amazing and a great statistic, but it's not because we're against C-sections. I mean, yes, we are against a necessary C-section, but it's more because we give the parents options and we help them ask the questions and can navigate the medical system. So there's a lot of advocacy that has to do with that, right?
Yeah, I think that's
also the parents know someone.
Yeah. The biggest thing is that advocacy perspective is what I think my patients especially find is the most valuable in the actual moment of the birth. Of course, there's so much of the educational and different things that doulas provide before and after the actual birth. But I know that during the birth, they're just like, it was just so great to have somebody who can be there to be my voice and like be able to communicate. And it's just in an environment where sometimes people don't feel like they can, or what they should be asking or how they should be asking for it. So, I mean, maybe we'll surely touch on that a little bit more, but tell us about New York Baby now.
New York Baby was founded in 2014. I was a very busy doula. I started the doula work in New York in 2006. And eventually I got so busy that I couldn't handle the inquiries anymore. And at the same time, I knew so many doulas who needed clients and maybe even training, and who were on the newer side and didn't have a medical background. So I was like, let's put those two together, the clients and the moms and the doulas. So I started the agency, started collecting the kind of moving along and collecting the doulas on the way, basically. And we did meetings, and then I put the doulas in touch with the clients, and it kind of took off from there. So it's a very nice system. It's a good group of doulas. I know them all. Many I've known for a long time, and they can use each other for backup and questions. But mainly there's a lot of trustworthiness for the clients, because if they know they go through someone who puts them in touch with the doulas, it's just not this solo doula. And if there's ever any problem, and whether it's just the doula is suddenly no longer available, then there's someone to fall back on, right? And that's the main idea, is like an additional safety net, kind of.
Because birth is so unpredictable.
Yeah. Sure.
Awesome. Great. So we'll put all the information there in the show notes for people to be able to follow that work and get in touch. So let's kind of like start our conversation about, like, you have this German background, and you've got medical training there as a midwife, and you've done acupuncture and acupressure and all that stuff too. How does that like kind of the medical system there with birth differ from the birth here? I know that in America, it's it's a large country, so there's lots of different, and depending on where you live and what kind of like neighborhood you're in, or what part of town you're in, people can have different experiences. But overarchingly, from the US medical system versus the German medical system, what do you feel like are like some of the biggest similarities or differences?
The biggest difference is that in Germany, by law, the midwife delivers the baby. So we don't have the doctor in the room to deliver the baby. They are present in the room. We call them in like upon birth, but they usually just wait in the corner in case there's a problem. But by law, the midwife has to attend the birth. A doctor would not be allowed to deliver the baby on his or her own, together with the family. And that's really the biggest thing, that parents expect a midwife to be in the room. They also get 30 home visits paid by insurance after birth, done by a midwife. Wow. The midwife doesn't really get paid anything. So that needs to be mentioned as well. Like, midwives can barely survive in their job, but it's still an amazing system, because 30 times you can catch a lot. So we have much less issues during the birth, first of all, but also after the birth, because the midwife comes in every day and checks on the mother and the baby and weighs the baby and checks the other children, and just kind of sees about the adjustment. So it's a very, very different system. And here, doulas get hired by the parents directly. They have to pay out of pocket most of the time, though we do see more companies who pay for doulas, which is amazing. They also here parents get paid more for lactation consultation. So that's a very nice change, positive change. But there is less preparation in the US too. In Germany, our families, they can do childbirth classes, breastfeeding classes, newborn care classes, everything at the hospital paid by insurance. And in here, same thing. You have to decide where you go, and maybe go to an independent provider, which I generally like to do, because then they can tell you in general how things work. But you have to pay it on your own and organize it on your own. You're just not part of this big system. And so I noticed that our clients here are a little bit more lost. We really do a lot of hand-holding and just guide them along. Hey, this is when you need to make this and that decision. This is when you book your class. This is when you need to decide on your placenta. What do you mean placenta? What what decision do I make about my placenta? Well, you could take it home with me. And so there's a lot of that. And we build trust throughout the pregnancy. When we have a prenatal session, we discuss what they want for their birth. So when they go into labor, there's a lot of relationship built already. And therefore, we can lower the fear. So you really need that preparation time to have a good birth experience. One thing is, of course, emotionally, but the other thing is physically. A lot of things we need to tell people, like, this is how you need to prepare for your birth, or should, we advise it and recommend it, because yes, birth is natural, but at the same time, when people give birth at a hospital, there's a certain timeline that we need to follow. And so it's good to know what that could look like, and also how to prepare the body so that we avoid any kind of bumps and slowdowns during labor and birth, and everything goes quite smoothly. I think that's,
I think the big thing here is the whole insurance medical system. It kind of boils down to a lot of the political framework here in the United States that unfortunately isn't the most conducive for families to get that help and that support and everything that they need prenatally, during the birth, and postpartum. Forget the conversation around childcare. We won't even go there. But when it comes to the actual, there's a lot of differences from place to place, country to country, continent to continent, for sure. But one of the things that I think we both can agree on largely is that in larger metropolitan cities, where there's less of that family support and less of that kind of cultural influences that can often help people in a community setting understand birth and recovery a little bit easier, you don't often have that, because people, like, I have patients who, when I first started working in the birth world, when my patient was like, oh yeah, and then my mom's staying in a hotel, something, I was like, in my like, if I ever put my mom in a hotel, my brain wouldn't go there. Not because I think that that's a right or a wrong thing to do. It's just, I've never put my mom in a hotel before, because like, she would just come and stay at my place, but in a small 1-bedroom apartment or a studio apartment or whatever, like, the space issues and the time constraint issues and the relationship, whatever those differences are, sometimes you just don't have that kind of support that you might get in other places, or that you might get otherwise. So I'd love for you to kind of touch on that maybe. And do you find that people who come with like a cultural background where birth and recovery, there's like a big focus on family and kind of like the whole village kind of helps, does that help? Or maybe sometimes that can be detrimental, because there's so much information, or so many voices, or should do's, can do's, won't do's. How do you feel about that, working with so many different families here?
Yeah, I actually send out a newsletter. It goes out automatically to everyone about maybe 6 or 8 weeks before the due date. Our newsletters are based on people's due dates. And it touches on dealing with the grandparents, because there's so much expectation from their side, and quite a bit of expectation from the new parent side, but it's not always talked about. With COVID now, things are different too. For 2 years, nobody could even enter the country, which was awful. And so we had people who hired doulas or baby nurses from our team, because they just needed someone, and the family couldn't help. And now the family can come help, and usually it's welcome, but not always. It really depends on the culture. There's certainly cultures where it's just absolutely normal and expected that the family comes. Usually it's the mother-in-law, and stays with them. And then there's other cultures where it's not so common, and they are being put up in a hotel or an Airbnb nearby, which we tend to recommend depending on really what they set up, and really depending on the conversation. Because when we talk with the parents during the prenatal, hey, what does your postpartum time look like? You can see in their faces how they talk about their help that they're about to get, his face, her face. And then you get a sense of how much tension there could be, and that's what we want to avoid, right? Rather get a little bit of stress beforehand, and have people and set them up in an Airbnb, and then have them over all the time. Great, but then there's no pressure in that regards. Then having everyone living in the same space in New York, as you know, it's not always a lot of space. And then there's different expectations because grandparents or family, they come in thinking they're going to take care of the baby, when in fact they do everything but the baby. They cook, they do the laundry, the groceries, they whatever. And maybe later on, of course, eventually they get the baby to take care of. But in the beginning, the baby should be with the mother and the father and or the partner. And just really everybody should kind of find out about their schedule. And sometimes it can be a little much if then the family's like, give me the baby, like you should sleep, when in fact, the mother should maybe breastfeed right now, or just kind of bond and do skin to skin. That's one thing. And the other thing is the own history that family brings in. Whenever people have a child and their parents come in to visit, they go through their own memories, which is beautiful. But sometimes it kind of breaks open during that time. I've had quite a few home visits where the grandmother was suddenly sitting next to me in tears because she was suddenly remembering her own postpartum story. And either she said, oh my God, I didn't have this kind of help. Or she said, this was so different during my time. Or she's just so much in love with this whole new generation. It's really quite interesting. But the new mother, is of course not really able to deal with that during that time, right? And that is another thing that we want to be aware of. Those situations, some people know there's some baggage, others don't. And in the end, it really depends on the relationship, and also the relationship of the partner with the respected person who comes, mother-in-law, mother, because it should never be the case that the mother kind of, connects with her own mother, and then the baby, and then the partner is a little bit off to the side, which can happen, right? Especially when the own mother, when they're very close, or it's the opposite, the mother-in-law, and then they all have their own opinions. So yeah, there's so much happening, but I love it. I think it's just so interesting to see the dynamics when the baby comes, and to see the grandparents just kind of jump on that opportunity to be there to help, because your kid is their kid. That's just how it is, right? If their child has a child, of course, it's their child too. So you might think different as an expecting mother, right? The mother is like, no, it's my child, right? So yeah, and it needs to be discussed, and then we're good.
Yeah, and the reason why I brought it up, I think, is also because it's a bit easier when you have those conversations with your partner and come up with that postpartum plan and talk to your doula and how, or whoever on your birth team who can facilitate, even if that's just like a friend who's coming over to cook a couple of times a week, and have people who are helping you to be like, hey, this is what the expectations are, and this is what we're going to do as a family unit, and this is how all of the other moving parts, how we're hoping to make it work. And it might not work exactly the way that you had projected, but at least you kind of go in thinking, not like going in being like, oh, I never considered like who's going to be sleeping over at the same time at the same night with like in a 1-bedroom apartment where there's no space, for example. And sometimes people have those conversations like a little too late, and then it can become like very stressful. But you can have these conversations earlier on. It makes it just a little bit easier. But having said that, we can kind of shift gears. I know we want to talk a little bit about, midwife versus doula versus baby nurse, baby specialist, night nurses. There's a lot of these wonderful people who can support this whole pregnancy and postpartum journey. So I'd love for you to just break it down for people. Like, what are their different roles, and when do you think that people should start to reach out and ask for, like, working with different individuals? I'm sure this doesn't happen on the due date time. So when is a good time to reach out?
It can happen, but we usually scramble to find someone. So birth doulas are support people who help throughout pregnancy, birth, and then postpartum as much as the parents book or want for after the birth. We usually get booked a good 6 months before the due date. I have quite a few August inquiries right now that I'm dealing with. So the doula needs to create her own schedule and decide when she's taking a summer vacation. And the birth doula is then available for the rest of the pregnancy. It's usually a package fee that includes being available for the rest of the pregnancy and answer all kinds of questions, and a couple of phone calls and text messages and emails, just kind of guidance. And then it gets a little bit more condensed around the due date when there's a prenatal or several prenatal sessions, and then of course birth support, on-call phase. being there for the birth, and then a postpartum or several postpartum visits. Some birth doulas are postpartum doulas as well. Others are birth doulas like myself and lactation consultants. So I don't do postpartum doula services where I come in for 6 hours and cook or do overnights or run errands, but I come in for a 90-minute visit that is more clinical, where we weigh the baby, examine the baby, are in touch with the pediatrician, check on the mother's breast and postpartum recovery. So the clinical visits of lactation consultants, they can usually get reimbursed by insurance, which is nice. And so some doulas are also lactation consultants. Others are only lactation consultants and don't do any other doula work, except maybe something completely different like nutritionist or physical therapists. It's really fun how what kind of combinations there are out there. And then the biggest confusion, I think, is the postpartum help in terms of postpartum doula and baby nurse or baby specialist or night nanny. The postpartum doula is a person who has a little more training than a baby specialist. She is mainly trained to help the mother, the parents, the partner, the baby to find their own rhythm. She does run errands. She does help around the household. She might do some cooking. She might tell the parents, hey, you go lie down. I'll take care of your baby. She's really like an overall caretaker, and she focuses on the mother or the parents. So they know how to take care of their child. So there's lots of teaching going on as much as they want to, of course. The baby nurse's focus is the baby. Here, baby nurse comes in, give me the baby. I'll take the baby. So she does everything in terms of helping, figuring out a schedule, changing the diapers, helping with bottles, a little bit of breastfeeding, though they don't have a certification with breastfeeding, but also everything handling babies' feeds and, of course, development. Their hourly rate is a little lower. The training is really focused on the baby, and they usually have a minimum of 12 hours. So the doula could be booked for 20 postpartum hours, and they can be used for, let's say, 6 visits. Each are about 3 hours, 3 to 4 hours long. And we use those maybe the first 2 weeks or 3 weeks, once or twice a week. And then the baby nurse comes in for 12 hours, usually at night, or even 24 hours. And then she stays for like a week or 2 or a month or 2, and literally lives with the family. And the baby nurse can only take on one family at a time, right? The doula could say, I could see 3 clients a day, like 3 hours each, maybe not 3, that's a little much, but 2. But she can take on 3 clients with the same due date because she doesn't always see every client at the same time, right? So that's really the biggest difference, what their focus is on. And we have clients who hire a night nanny, overnight baby specialist for the nights for 2-3 weeks, and then they get a postpartum doula for the day. Because they know the difference, they want someone who's like hands-on and maybe doing some cooking and really helping with breastfeeding. And they want someone to take care of the baby at night so they can sleep in between feeds. They still might need to wake up for the feeds if they're breastfeeding, but at least if the baby's a little fussy and doesn't go down right away after the feed, then there's a baby nurse who can take care of the baby.
Yeah, this is so helpful. Yeah, so helpful for so many people to know the differences, because they're, again, like, it's so great that we now know what a doula is. And like you said, like 5-10 years ago, most of my patients had no idea, or I would have to introduce them. And now people come in with like a team of people who, they're working with, which is phenomenal. And then I think the knowing who does what, like what are their roles and what do you need, because not everyone needs every single person to be a part of the team. Sometimes you might, just depending on your family situation, depending on if you have a partner, or what piece they're going to be playing, like we just talked about with family and in-laws and parents, grandparents. It just depends, right? Also your energy levels. So sometimes people might go in, like I've had a few patients who've gone through their births and didn't have any postpartum support, and the parents were, off for whatever time, like a couple of weeks or a couple of months that they were off from work. And they were totally like, yeah, we're going to handle this. It's going to be fine. And then they ended up asking me like, hey, do you have some contacts for people who can come in during the nighttime? Like, I think we got it during the day, but the nights are getting really tough. And I'm like, absolutely. You never know, but it's good to at least know that somebody is there to help, not suffer and be like, I
Yeah.
can't do this, but be like, oh, I know that there's a person, there's a profession, there's people who are here to do this exact role. And it's just a
Yeah.
matter of getting connected in this area with the right, referrals, so that I can ask around and see whose schedule works and who's available for that help.
Exactly. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think really if there's no other area of our lives where there's so many specialists and people who can help during that time, then for birth, pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, because there's so many different parts that come together and so many different needs. Absolutely.
Yeah. And like you just said, like sometimes I'll see a family do is get like a postpartum lactation specialist, like a single consult, and that's it.
Right. Yeah.
And then sometimes I'll have like 12 childbirth education classes, a midwife and a doula, postpartum doula, baby nurse, and like something else, and like another support team. And none of that is wrong. And that's what I want, like I think Stephanie and I are trying to say, is be empowered with the knowledge of the support team, come up with a plan that may not exactly go as planned, but at least you have an idea going into it, not like I'm alone, I don't know what to do. Like you said, most people in the US are lost, right? Because like our go-to is not a midwife like it is in Germany, for example. In the American system, most of the time these births are done by obstetricians. And so it's just important for people to be their own advocates. That's the purpose of the podcast too, just helping people become aware of different ways that they can work on their health and wellness. And, when it comes to birth, there's so many things to know about. And so staying on top of it is really important. But having said that, I'd love to jump into just birth prep. How do you kind of talk to your patients on the things that, like, what are the most important things that people need to do when they're preparing? We talked about the practitioners, I guess, already, but what do you feel like are the key points that people need to take away?
I think that's one of my favorite topics because there's so much control over how birth can go based on what's happening the weeks before, right? Because the better someone feels when they go into labor, the more likely the birth will go well. And even if not, if it still ends up being, let's say, an induction because the water broke and it just needed to be done, and the birth takes a long time and they're exhausted, but if they went into this like long stretch of being awake for 48 hours and they felt quite good going into that, they will be fine. Recovery will be okay. But if they crawl into the whole labor phase and give birth, they're like exhausted beforehand, recovery can be really tough. And we have quite a few risks after the birth that can then come up, like postpartum depression or, breast infection and things like that. So our big focus is, how do people feel the last few weeks of their pregnancy? Of course, beforehand too. We certainly tackle issues that come up, like sudden gut problems or back pain, where people don't really know, gosh, is that just a pregnancy, or is it, what could it be? And they're like, oh, it'll be fine, like how we usually deal with things maybe. But you will get more pregnant. So we want to tackle issues right away, even if they're in week 28 and you have time until 40 weeks. But no, if you have problems now, you can't sleep, or you have back issues, you need to address it right now, because it doesn't just go away because you'll get more pregnant, right? So we want to address these things early on. And that's why we're usually quite lucky with our births, because we know, okay, this is a little bit of a weak spot here. So then they address it, do exercises, yoga, see a physical therapist, like really people like you who know how to handle pregnancy. And then maybe something new shows up, but then the other thing is already much, much better, right? And that's a huge thing. And closer to the due date, we really want to look at strengthening the body, strengthening the uterus. There's nutrition that can be done, quite a few things. There is physical therapy, chiropractic care, everything that aligns the pelvis. There's a lot of exercise that can be done, like spinning babies exercises, maybe you've heard of that, where certain movements can be done to help the baby to position him or herself the best way in the pelvis, not only head down, but only the angle needs to be right? We want the baby to be lying in a hammock, sort of in your belly. So we don't want the baby to be back to back with you, but like baby's back to facing your belly. Things like that. And then really looking at what pattern does evolve in terms of contractions, right? Then when we see, oh, there's some Braxton Hicks happening, we can help to do things that soften the cervix, which is a huge deal. We had a client who gave birth 2 days ago, and she was already 1 centimeter, quite effaced when she went into labor. And the idea is to get that done, because when you're already 1 centimeter in a face, you've already done like 5, 6, 7, 8 hours of birth work without even noticing it, right?
Yeah.
With acupuncture, with chiropractor, with physical therapy, just by doing things that soften the cervix and strengthen the uterus. So those little Braxton Hicks contractions can do something. So then when you go into labor, you have much more stamina, because you go in, you don't have this like lengthy early labor and you're exhausted when you go into active labor, but you actually go in labor and move through it quite quickly in a good pattern, because you're just not starting from zero. You have a bit of a head start. And that's on Tuesday, the birth of Monday, well, whatever, 2 days ago. That's exactly what happened, right? She was like, oh, I think I'm in labor. And then 3 hours later, she was like in full-blown labor. And a few hours after that, the baby was already here, that was unusual for a first baby, but then it wasn't so unusual, because everything was like, she did a lot of stuff to help herself, to set herself up to have smooth labor.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
really body, emotion, reading up on things, being relaxed about it.
Yeah. I love that. Movement is always, I think a lot of the things that you're touching on is movement, healthy movement, symptom-free movement.
Yes.
It helps the baby move. So I always encourage that, when people are like, what am I supposed to do now? I'm like, just move your body. And, for those who are like worried about the epidural, well, actually, let me ask you that now, that since we're there, I have so many patients who will ask me this question about, I don't know if I'm going to be getting an epidural or not, but if I do, I'm so worried about I've the birth positions and different ways, and this whole idea of movement being so helpful. I'm so scared that I'm not going to be able to really do any of that. What's your advice on that?
Right. Yeah, that's a bit of a fact. So if someone has an epidural, she can't move anymore. We can do a little bit left and right, but contractions go away. Usually Pitocin needs to be given, and the whole thing becomes very artificial with a higher likelihood of a C-section. But it really depends when an epidural is given, and also why is it given. Ideally, if someone even plans on an epidural, there's a good window to give it when someone is in active labor, meaning we know the baby's head is quite deep in the pelvis. The contractions are really established, very regular. The cervix should be ideally 5, 6 centimeter dilated. And labor should just be like going, right? Because then if you have an epidural and you lie down, it doesn't affect labor as much. Maybe Pitocin, it still needs to be given. That's the case like 95% of the time. But the baby's head is so low already that it can't dislocate so easily than it could if it's very early. Some people get an induction and the OB is like, oh, let's just give you the epidural and you can sleep. Okay, well, the labor hasn't even started yet, and then she's getting the epidural, and then it doesn't always work to bring the body in labor if you haven't really done anything. The hormones haven't aligned at all. There was no help from your own body, and we do need that, unfortunately. So it really is about timing, and then about the labor process. There's certainly births here and there that I attend where the mother's like, no, never epidural. I don't want one. And then we're stuck somewhere. Like it doesn't move, maybe even early 3 centimeter, just things don't progress. And the contractions are a very interesting pattern and incredibly uncomfortable for the phase that she's in, very unusual. And those are situations where it makes sense to say, hey, you know what? You need to rest. We need to relax that pelvic floor. We need to help this baby down with the relaxed pelvic floor, and you need to sleep, because that's then your chance to have a vaginal birth, right? Because if you're stuck at 3 centimeter, then, well, we can't walk around like that forever, right? So it's such an individual thing, and I think in the end, it's whatever makes a person feel safest. That is usually the best decision. And then, having a doula, because the timing, that makes a big difference.
Absolutely. I love that you said that. I know like doulas are not opposed to C-sections. If that's the safest thing, that you need to be able to do that. Not opposed to Pitocin, not opposed to epidurals. It's It's just that going in with a blanket statement of everyone should be just getting this because we need to move the labor on due to timing constraints. That is something that I know that all my doula friends, and I know Stephanie, you as well, are opposed to, because that's not working with the physiology of the birthing individual.
Yeah.
So, and that's why you guys are there as advocates, to really have this conversation with the healthcare team and be able to advocate for the mother, the birthing individual, and the baby, and really be there to, again, make this safe and effective and do the necessary interventions, as opposed to the medical profession just kind of throwing in all the interventions and you thinking that you have to take all of them and use all of those options. They're options, but sometimes they're not presented as that, right?
Yeah.
So you're there to navigate through that and help the mother, the birthing individual, understand.
And just kind of step away from it, because often it's like, oh, we should do this and that, and the doctor's like in their face, right? And to just be like, can we have 5 minutes? That's all it takes oftentimes, right? Can we discuss this, the pros and cons, and then ask the questions, but not feeling like this needs to be done now, because that's for postpartum, what helps, there's closure. Oh, we discussed this. This was how the birth went, and at every moment we just knew why and what happened, and we had the time. Yeah,
I love it. Well, this is amazing. I feel like we could go on forever and ever and ever and ever.
I'm such a birth junkie.
I know, I'm obsessed with it all. Is there anything else that you feel like you really want to add in today for our guests, either about the work that you do specifically, or just, birth in general?
I think a big part that people sometimes forget is the birth partner, who also wants to prepare it somehow, and who sometimes needs to maybe rest or eat, because if birth does take a while, it is, even if there's no doula in the room, there should be someone who could come in and take over for a while. Really discussing how involved do you want to be, honey? Because it's just not a given that dads to be, partners to be, moms to be, want to see the actual birth, or want to and can massage the whole time and be part of the whole thing. It's just sometimes they just can't, right? Or they're faint when they see a little bit of blood, or they're really stressed out. So doulas are really there to help partners just as much. They ask the questions. I have one dad, we had 4 babies together with the mother. He texts me every time. So whenever we have a birth together,
right? Not all at once. It was 4 different births.
No, it was, yes, 4 different births over, a good question, over like 6 years. Yeah. And he always texts me his questions, and then he makes this like, head movement that I should grab my phone, because he doesn't want to ask these questions in front of the mother. And that helps tremendously, right? So we don't take over for partners. We want to be an addition, and we can leave the room if people want some privacy, no problem. But it's a huge relief for most partners to have that, and just know there's someone there for them as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that is a missing piece, that sometimes people don't think that doulas can support the whole family, really, and navigating between family members. It's really like jack of all trades. I love it so much. So tell the audience how people can find you, Stephanie. What's the best way to connect with you and your work and hire you and get the support?
Yes. So we serve all of New York City. Even a little bit outside of the city, like a little bit of Westchester, or Jersey City, and a little bit surrounding cities. What else? Website is thenewyorkbaby.com. Everything's spelled out. Email works, Stephanie@thenewyorkbaby.com. My phone number will be given, or you can find that on the website as well. That usually works best. We have an inquiry form on our website where you can literally click through. The system walks you through. Are you interested in this? Are you interested in that? And a little bit of range of pricing and the packages, so you can really get a good rundown of the services. And then we'll get back to you with doulas who have availability, or baby nurses. And we always love to schedule a call as well to hear a little bit more what people want, to find the best team that we can put together.
Love it. I'll drop some links in the show notes for your Instagram, so people can have a little follow and get to know your work more. And thank you so much, Stephanie, for being here today. Amazing work that you do.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, my pleasure.